Many of the best-known AAA studios these days have pedigrees that go back nigh 30 years, and the most well-reputed studios are those that have produced famously good games in the past. Think of Bioware, Bethesda, CD Projekt RED, and Obsidian, to name but a few. And these names became household names in due time in the gaming industry for certain genres. And what happens here is that these games create what is effectively a credit system in the eyes of the customers who purchase them. And once good games have been made several times over, the credit system further expands. Another name for this credit system is simply reputation. Throughout the late aughts and the early 2010s, for example, Bioware was one of the premier RPG studios in the West, with series such as Mass Effect having created a legendary reputation for Bioware, and to a lesser degree Dragon Age, as well as games such as Star Wars, Knights of the Old Republic. Games such as these gave Bioware credit, and the credit that was created rested in the name Bioware itself. A similar tale could be spun about Bethesda game studios having made games such as Morrowind, Oblivion, Fallout 3, and of course Skyrim. And although CD Projekt RED is younger and has fewer games, Witcher 3 solidified the reputation as a renowned studio and generated a great deal of reputational credit for them, which was later leveraged in overpromising and under-delivering with Cyberpunk 2077, something we'll come back to later. So the formula is simple. Studios make good to excellent games in the past, customers come to trust them because they've made good games, and for a while, players will buy their games without bias or caution simply based upon the reputational credit that the studios have built up in the past. I say for a while because credit is not infinite, and nothing is immutable, and reputations can and do change. Since a major focal point of this video is CD Projekt RED, let's talk about their reputational credit and how it got and is getting used up in the wrong way. CD Projekt RED's Cyberpunk 2077 was possibly the most hyped up game of all time, and most of you know the story by now. In particular, on last generation consoles, it was released with a mind-boggling array of bugs and problems that needed countless months of patches and fixes. Not only that, but many of the promises made by CDPR, such as verticality in the game, or even the importance of your background, this being Corpo, Nomad, or Street Kid, turned out to be either minimally important or non-existent. So all in all, Cyberpunk 2077 released with so many problems that the reputational credit that CDPR had built up over the previous decade with Witcher 3 and its fantastic expansions, Hearts of Stone and Blood and Wine, vanished in a puff of smoke, to say nothing of many large-scale content creators that had actively participated in promoting the hype for Cyberpunk 2077. But eventually Cyberpunk 2077 was patched up, and Phantom Liberty, its sole expansion, was released, which was very positively reviewed by most people, and separate from the expansion there were many free updates to the game, so CDPR has sort of rebuilt their reputational credit. I say sort of because part of reputational credit lies in the people who directly contributed to said credit. And this is really the focus of this video. A name is just a name. A game development studio is just a name, but lacking the people who contributed to the name will create problems down the line, as the studio attempts to live up to the old reputation it once had. This holds true for almost everything, mind you. Imagine you'd been buying the same brand of shoes for over 30 years from a particular manufacturer of shoes, and every time you buy them, they are durable, comfortable, and just plain good. And then after 30 years, you notice that the latest pair you bought is not quite as comfortable, not as durable, and just not very good. You probably would think it's a one-off, but in time, if the shoes turn out worse and worse, and don't match the old quality, you will start to wonder what has happened to your favorite shoe manufacturer. The answer to what happened is pretty simple. Whatever process had been used to make the shoes has now changed. And the same thing is happening in the gaming world. The people who make the games comprise the talent that allow good games to exist in the first place. And the name of a studio is just a name. Over the years, some of the key people that made CDPR what it was have moved on and left. And it isn't just nobody. You might recognize, for example, the Tomaszkiewicz brothers. And forgive my bad pronunciation, I don't speak Polish. Arguably, the guys who made Witcher 3 Wild Hunt what it was. And they're now at their own studio, Rebel Wolves, working on Dawnwalker. And as you can see, there were several others that left that held key important positions. Now that doesn't mean that their boots cannot be filled or that the next Witcher game will be bad, but it does mean that CDPR has become something of a wild card when you take departures such as these into account and what happened with the release of Cyberpunk 2077, and what appears to be an increasing focus on politics on their part rather than just making games. They simply don't have the same reputational credit they once had, and they're burning it up even as I speak. And when we look at current year Bioware, the situation is not entirely dissimilar. Whatever you may think of Dragon Age in general, the fact that before its release, the latest iteration of the IP has caused so much controversy, and indeed more controversy than any other title put out by Bioware to date, tells us much. If the game looks very different, and indeed plays very different, then there are probably reasons for that, and those reasons have everything to do with the people who used to be involved in Dragon Age and are no longer there. Mike Laidlaw comes to mind, for example, somebody who was the lead designer for Dragon Age Origins and Dragon Age 2, and the creative director for Dragon Age Inquisition, and who was an essential person in the series. And then you have such people as David Gator, who goes way back to the original Baldur's Gate games, and was deeply involved in crafting the lore of Thedas itself, as well as obviously writing for the setting. Now you cannot pretend that losing such original talent has no impact or effect on a game. It obviously does, and it changes the kind of game that is made. And when people have gotten used to a style of game predicated on the involvement of certain people, and those people are no longer there, then you may encounter problems and dissatisfaction in the consumers. And Bethesda represents an interesting case, in that it isn't just that some of the old guard have left, such as Will Shen, a well-known quest designer, for example, as many of the problems that began to emerge from them were related to organizational structural issues that have to do with team size. So, if you've dared to play Starfield, you will note that many of the areas in the game seem disconnected from each other and disjointed. And we actually have an explanation for this offered by someone who had actually worked at Bethesda for many years and then left, Nate Perkapile. Perkapile had been working at Bethesda since Fallout 3 as an artist and designer, but then left after the fiasco of Fallout 76 to work on his own indie game. And it said the following: I know a lot of people have thoughts on Starfield and how it's probably too big and should have been smaller. I agree with a lot of that, and while I enjoyed working at Bethesda a lot when we were about 65 to 110 people on Fallout 3 and Skyrim, I enjoyed it a lot less as it grew and grew. I had a lot of fun building spaces. A lot of you probably have seen, like Diamond City, Blackreach, and Little Lamplight. I was lead artist on Point Lookout and Fallout 76 and more. Starfield was about 500 people or so, and with 4 different companies involved: BGS, BGS Austin, BGS Dallas, BGS Montreal, and that's not including outsourcing. This just wasn't my style. There were so many meetings, and it wasn't the way I like to build games. I like being able to just move fast and build unique things. But here, you can see that the size that Bethesda grew to was a serious problem, because it became much more about managing big teams rather than making games. So the loss of people can and has had an effect on various studios, but so too does poor organization. And both of these things can affect the reputational credit of a developer. And in the case of a studio such as CDPR, Bioware, and Bethesda, it's looking less than good. But to end this video on a more positive note, when people leave, they typically go somewhere else. And one of my reasons for being relatively optimistic about Exodus, for example, is the fact that the people working on it are the people that helped build BioWare's original reputation in the first place, before they left. And the Tomaskowitz brothers, who were instrumental in making The Witcher 3, are now at the helm of their own studio, Rebel Wolves, working on their own dark fantasy RPG, Dawnwalker. So some good can come from the bad, and in such cases it gives us reason to be more optimistic than we might otherwise be when we look at the rest of the industry. Let's hope I'm right about my optimism on this point. And as always, thank you for tuning in, and if you like my takes and my content, you can leave a like, comment, share, and subscribe. It's much appreciated, and I'll check you out next time. Take care.